Hello, students. In our earlier lecture, we have gone through this particular poem, that is Second Coming. Now, it is our next turn to appreciate this particular poem and discuss about it. As we have seen, there are some questions that have been raised in this particular poem. Yeats observes that his mind has been from time to time were very much possessed in the philosophy, that is theosophical philosophy, his concept, his maturing poet, his mind were developing and leading him to the visions. And that vision that we see, this particular poem origins or begins in the middle of this vision. It describes this spiritus mundi in this particular poem that he had seen many times before, always to his left side, always to the within the range of his sight, a kind of a beast, a kind of an image that descending upon the earth. This vision is very much practiced by W.B. Yeats. At the same time, there is something magical belief that this particular poem emotionally tries to represent. Belief in what he called as the magnum annus, means it's the great year, the Platonic year, something that slightly differs in its symbolism. It's a kind of a wheel, एक चक्र आहे जे complete होणार आहे. 2000 years, a cycle is going to come to a complete end. And this philosophy, this belief with respect to the history of the Christianity or different history of epochs is associated with the great year of death and rebirth. These beliefs have the scaffold of such gyres and figures and cones that he write that he has written about in more detail in the book Vision. Of course, the poet and the philosopher have only to see and hear. So, as it happens, the Christian era, after nearly 2000 years, is due for extinction and new world to come up with the second coming. So, this hint the poet wished to give us as the 2000 is going to come when Yeats wrote this particular poem. The words and phrases that we see used in the poem are very much the obsessed mind of Yeats with image. Images, as we have seen, have flown right from the private doctrine, some from Yeats's direct sense, some from both the ceremony of innocence, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Yeats uses this to the dying aristocratic social traditions. So, in 7 or 8th line, the poet tries to refer to the doctrines of great year and the phases of the moon. It is predicted as necessary that at the time we have reached, the best minds, being subjective, should have lost all faith through desiring it, and the worst minds, being so nearly objective, had no need of faith and may be full of passionate intensity. The behavior and nature of men in power, The second coming means from the summary observation that this is how men are, and especially the men of power. So, in the world we live in, it is a knowledge, the knowledge that comes from the fury and mire of human veins, the promise that it's a way of life. The second coming is a famous and startling poem. The first part of the poem deals with religiosity. It is not a naturalistic passage. The falcon and falconer are both symbolic. At the same time, they hold the cosmic image, the anarchy, the turning of the world to centrifugal, the anarchy being loosed on the world, the blood dimmed tide, everything that has the occult meaning. It's a, it stands for the warring images. The last two lines, although they sound to be naturalistic, they might be distinguished from elsewhere, but they are the climax. We have to deal with these in the context of the poem. So there is certain kind of a powerful animal thronging towards the earth. It is not the scriptures like a spiritus mundi, means it's a kind of a sphinx, Egyptian sphinx. It's and passing of Christ in his favor. The poet's meaning in these lines, 20 centuries have passed and the ideal the prophet has come to a perfect inaptitude. The new millennium will dawn. We cannot tell what ideal will they obey. So it's a monstrous ideal and abstract animal power that is moving towards the earth. The poet has visualized the world that is horror, the destructive world. Every man carries in him that the continuance of the world depends on his own existence. Jealous of the real world which kills and survives and delights in the great finale. It is careful, it tries to manage and end everything that we see. It's prophetic. He gives us an expression of his insight. He makes the use of his system in the poem. These gyres, binding then and now, pointing towards the destructive birth. In the real world, the revolution caused the anarchy. The gyres are widening. The center cannot hold. The blood dimmed tide of violence, ceremony of innocence is drowned, brings us that what does this innocence opposes? It opposes, stands for the sexual and social violence. Yeatsa's purpose has begun to move. Its draws from Spiritus Mundi is, of course, an utmost symbol of the time. This future that he predicted in the vision, the symbol of this future is presented in the form of a lion body and head of a man. Yet let his rough beast slouch towards Bethlehem, the seat of Christian era that it tries to supersede. So the poem is the meaning of the poem, intensity of the poem is primarily based on the ideas like second coming, rocking carol towards the Bethlehem. It's in order to express his vision, lays the strong hold on the availability of the public language. The poem is not a coherent but a memorable restraint of the line that we see. The rhetorical aspect of these lines are very striking, and with this in mind, it is possible that the famous line, the ceremony of innocence was drowned, is a discrete example of the exploitation. So, the, the poem tries to generalize his immediate forbidding into a historical statement, and since the historical idea is itself ambiguous, it simply confirms the confusion of fear and hope from which the poet begins. Uncertain to his own position, yet turns, so to speak, to his lessness. It stands in relation to the rough bus, the companion poem to his purposes, after all, the restraint and the assured in the prayer for my daughter. So, this particular poem brings us the modern world's end. The world is going to end, and this poem brings us to the Christian, say, 2000 years coming to an end. Dark forces are taking the hold of the poem, and that is what we see in this particular, say, lines. The poem is in blank verse. Its use half rhymes, Anglo-Irish rhymes. Tension of the poem is continuously going on. It's a moment of repetitions, which we find here. The images are very striking, and it's a complex process of absorption that we see. So, we have this Byzantium poem that he follows the same technique to write here. So, with this, we come to end of this poem, that is the second coming. Thank you.